But anyways, well, I think we're officially going to kick things off and get started here. Malcolm Saunders, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much, Shawn, for having me on.
Yeah, honestly, it's really great to have you here. Been really enjoying all your content online, and just recently, to prep for the show, dive deeper into your work, which, I think we're going to have a great show, and we can have a lot of in-depth dialogue on things that I think is important for people right now. But yeah, like, I guess what I'll do, I would love to have, more so a discussion that would help listeners gain, a comprehensive and different perspective on, say, our immune system and viruses, and maybe where the mainstream narrative is falling short to support the creation of vitally healthy, happy, resilient human beings. So I find we're living in this world right now, and I guess I can start with this. We're living in this world right now where the mainstream media, from my perspective anyways, as a health science PhD student and just a longtime political observer, we're getting a lot of cherry picking of studies to sell us on a specific narrative of the world. And I believe it just really comes down to us having more health science literacy and just overall health sovereignty, right? So I want to pick your brain on some of the stuff you've been sharing on Instagram in regards to censorship and, some of the biased media things, but overall how folks can take better care of themselves that might be more in line with the healing powers of nature and the rhythms of nature, right? So, and so many people, I'm sure, have been turning to you, they've been turning to me in this time where they're kind of just fed up with this mainstream narrative, and they want to know what they can do to take control, right? So I'll kind of segue it over to you there. And I guess first ask, before we dive too deep down the rabbit hole, is like, tell us about your background into entrepreneurship. Tell us about, your path into superfoods, intuitive eating, and all things like herbal elixirs and whatnot.
Cool, right on. So yeah, and thank you again for having me on. This conversation is so important, and you're right. I am receiving a ton of feedback as I have just trusted, stepped up and began sharing, and I'm definitely fully living my purpose. Which I had been doing for a couple of decades, but it wasn't always so easy. It is a journey. I know many people can probably relate of, just that existential question, like, what's my purpose in life? What am I here for? I've always had a yearning to contribute, to be a positive contribution to society. And since March, I always have been, but have definitely stepped up, to the 10th degree in terms of, fully living my purpose. And there's kind of two guiding principles. So the first one is very much tied into my business, Light Cellar, which exists to help people find and learn how to craft their own food and medicine. And we'll get into that. And been working on that, helping people both in a kind of a physical way of like, hey, where do I find this stuff, right? As our choices from the grocery store have just narrowed, the diversity of our diet has reduced, and the quality of the food has gone down and down and down. It doesn't have to be that way. There are channels and avenues, and that we can source out really good, high quality food that absolutely nourishes us. And tied in with that is that understanding of, well, what is my food and medicine? How do I feed myself? I ended up on this path, and I guess I'll just mention my other kind of mission, and it'll all tie together before I get into that story. So the other one is kind of on a personal level, is inspiring positive contribution in society, right? For me was kind of as a young 16-year-old, I was living in suburban Calgary, kind of facing this reality of, a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, right? This kind of prison sentence that you're going to go to school, you're going to get good grades, to get a good job, to be well paid. And that was, farthest from what I wanted. I felt like I was in a prison of high school, and then just the imagining of like, okay, more school and then into the workforce, it just didn't, it was a dead end for me. But music was an absolute passion and a connection. So I did go to school, but at the end of a 2-year jazz music degree, I realized that it wasn't going to get me that high paid position. So I did what any young person conscientious of their future does, which is I basically gave everything up and went traveling.
Nice.
And my journeys led me all around the world. The grass is always greener. For a time, I feel like there's an incredible experience that one can have, learning, searching, exploring, getting out of your own backyard. And that's what I did. I followed what my favorite herbalist, Stephen Herod Buhner, says, golden threads, right? It was just one thing after another, like, oh, wow, like synchronicity. I just started reading this book and hey, there's like a society for it just down the street. I'm going to go hang out with them. And wow, they got a center in California. I'm going to go hang out with them. And then I was back to the West, up in Canada, and just went like that until all of a sudden I had found myself, I met my partner. We'd been traveling through, Scotland, England, India, Nepal. And the moment we were in India for 6 months, and we're meditating. At that time, I'd been meditating. I'd gotten deep into this style of meditation called Vipassana. I was sitting from anywhere from 4 to 14 hours a day, basically just trying to get away from the world and find myself, right? I didn't like the influence the world was having, the direction it was going, and I wanted to have the least amount of influence on the world. It very kind of caught into the environmentalism movement, right? Just having that deep ecological wound of just like, what are we doing to the earth, and how are people living, and look at them, like this kind of, zombie mentality of just their everyday existence. And I'm like, I'm just going to escape, right? And find myself. I'll find my own kind of inner peace and happiness. But yet I was still finding that the world was having an influence on me. It was hard to escape. So I came kind of full circle as we had arrived in India, and I'd been on this kind of, almost this yogic kind of monastic path, even considering like, well, maybe I'll just become a monk and, live in a cave, that kind of a thing.
Right.
And, but what I was hearing from a lot of these traditions was that now is not the time for that. Now is the time to be in the world, to help change the world. And yes, you can have your practice and you can be spiritual, you can find yourself, but we need people out in the world bringing that consciousness into the everyday and changing our communities. And simultaneous to that, my wife had a recurring dream. We weren't married at the time, but we had just met, and it was kind of one of those stories of love at first sight. Like, it was like, oh, hello, we're going to spend the rest of our life together. And so we went off and traveled, and so she arrived in India, and every single night she had a recurring dream of returning home pregnant. And she didn't tell me that until later, but sure enough, that dream came true. And here I was, this kind of, meditating hippie with a jazz music degree that had avoided jobs at every, point and turn, was suddenly now faced with this, okay, you got to be a provider, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I was maturing into that, like, okay, I've done a ton of work on myself. I have a bit more idea of who I am, and how do I show up in the world? How do I contribute? How do I make a living to support myself, but also a positive contribution to the world? And so that's where the food part had come in, where at 16, with that thread of kind of environmentalism, I had some like vegan punk friends, like anarchists, right? And they, they stood for something, and they did it with their diet, and they did it with, music and other things. And so I was like, okay, I was never a vegan punk. I was more kind of like, the hippie type. So I was like, it was a Tuesday afternoon, unlike any other. I'd come home. I'd been thinking about this for a while, and I had this announcement. I was like, Mom, I'm going to become a vegetarian. She's like, well, you're still going to eat this supper, aren't you? She's Scottish, right? And so meat and potatoes. My brother and I love junk food. To me, honestly, I didn't have a view that was even junk food. It was just whatever was quick, easy, and tasted good. Right. And as you know, and most people know, well, what that is in society is a lot of packaged food, a lot of processed food. And it was a huge wake up for me in that moment to go from meat and potatoes and junk food to just potatoes and junk food. Where things did not go so well. It basically brought all these issues to the surface, like blood sugar issues, fainting spells, like no energy, all the color ran from my face. And it was a very quick, wake up call to, oh, there is something to food. And I was so committed to the ideals of, using my dietary choices as a force of change. that I was like, okay, I better figure out how to do this. And mom was so supportive. She was going through a divorce at the time, and she's, Malcolm, I support you, but I can't help you. So you're on your own. And she bought me some cookbooks and this and that, and and I dove in, and it took me so many years. And spoiler alert, like it was at least 12 years that it took me to realize I'm not meant to be a vegetarian. I went down every different rabbit hole and iteration of vegetarian. I think I was on my way trying to be a breatharian, right? It was like, vegetarian to vegan to raw vegan. And I learned a ton about my body, about nutrition. But in the end, the real place that I came to was about following my gut more than nutrition trends, and looking at traditional diets, cultural diets, and really honoring the wisdom of ancestors and my own biology. And so I've got some great insights that I'm sure that we'll get into about that and that whole journey. So I think those are the two kind of threads that we're going to go down today. Is food, nutrition, but also kind of being in the world, showing up. The world needs leaders. The world needs everyone's voice to speak up. I mean, that's one of the most shocking things that I've seen since March, and partly what kind of propelled me was, like, I know we want to get into this too, is this idea of the intuition, right? Like ever since this happened, like I know so many people, they're like, something's not quite right about this. Like something's not quite right. And we're being fed this kind of narrative, and we're trying to like look and see and like, okay, well, what's going on? And we're trying to read science papers, and we're trying to be part, like listen to the discussions and in the media narrative. And it's like, we just know something's wrong. And now we have so much more data than we did back then, but it's just been the slow unfoldment of something's not quite right. What's going on? Where is this leading? And here we are now today. And along that journey, I was like, well, who's speaking out? And anyone that did, it was almost like whack-a-mole. It was like, boom, like, like knockdown, like discredited, you're bad or whatever. And it was this kind of reluctance of like, okay, like I have to say something, I have a very tiny platform in the sense that I have a community and people that, have received a lot of benefit for what I've put out through food and nutrition. And this ultimately does tie in because it's about health. But I think it is about, anyone, the stay-at-home mom, the dad working the office, the kid going to school. It's like, if you know something's off, if you're feeling it, you have that intuition and you have your intellect to put this together. And I think it's the result of a society that has, discouraged, as much as we say like, oh, freedom of expression and, all these things, like, it's even our school system is repeat after me and follow orders. And we're now being called and tested to, like step up, be in your truth, have an opinion, decide what is right, what is wrong. And some of the most alarming things that have been going on right now are like just what I mentioned, observing those that would just even just ask the question, like, well, what about this? Like, what about that? Just like, boom, like whack-a-mole, like, nope. And it's just, been this one-sided narrative that is extremely concerning, and the most legitimate of voices. And I know you're into like the research, the science, the PhD studies, and it's shocking how much like even the most credible voices like, no, we're not hearing that. We're not listening to that. That's not a part of what's going on. It's like, well,
no, I know.
Wait a minute here. It is.
No, without doubt. And I'm so glad. Well, a lot of things that you said there. And I guess I should say first that I'm grateful for the fact that you followed your gut, and the fact that you are, finding your purpose and creating that conscious business space to deliver your craft and your art. Like, it's such a beautiful thing. And I can relate as someone here in the London, Ontario community who has actually created a business, one of Ontario's largest kombucha companies. And our tagline always was follow your gut. Now, I'm no longer involved in the business, but again, we're not often taught to trust our intuition. And I've been educated, or I've been overeducated and kind of need to unlearn a lot of the stuff that, I have a business and political science degree. I've got a master's in physical activity and sedentary behavior, and now I'm doing my PhD in forest therapy. But it almost seems like, to your point, like none of that really matters right now. And for me, it's always been the journey of following my gut and trying to figure out what exactly my purpose is. So to your other point, right now, it's so difficult to come out, like you say, and speak out about an alternative narrative around holistic health, because it is very much a whack-a-mole, because right now people don't want to hear that. And I do understand that people are, concerned given the virus that we keep hearing about. So it makes sense, but I do want to say thank you so much for doing that, because I think it's just so important that we are courageous in our purpose. It's so easy. And I have a very similar purpose to you. And I feel like sometimes I speak out like that right now, and it almost seems like I get flack in a way that might be like, hey, you're trying to like hurt my grandma because you're talking about, whatever it may be. And we'll get maybe more into this stuff, but like things like masks and lockdowns not being effective. And it's quite the opposite. I've spent almost 20 years now trying to help people increase control over their health. So it's just, again, I thank you for following that purpose, because it's a tough time to do so, given
Yeah.
what's going on right now, right? So
Let's get into that idea of the intuition, and I'll maybe share a story. As I just similar to you, you kind of go down this academic path, and folks will hopefully be able to relate to this. I'm sure growing up, we always knew at least two different types of people that approach music in two very different ways, right? So my wife, she was classically trained piano. She went through all the kind of conservatory grades, and could play beautiful music, off the sheet, like, conservatory classical style music. Yeah, wonderful. Amazing. I mean, I'm totally in awe of it. And I had other friends that, couldn't read a lick of music, had no idea about any of the theory, but, their ability to play beautiful music was from ear, right? They could just hear it. They had this natural kind of innate sense and ability, playing from the heart, or from ears, as we describe it. And I started off in that camp, just trying to, figure it out. Like, just, I'm a drum kid. Okay. Here's one thing. And I had some teachers that would show me. And then slowly, like, the theory kind of crept in, where, I wanted to learn, okay, well, how do I read music? Drum music. And then it got into, other types of instruments. And then going to college, it was like that full immersion. So I played music all the way through junior high school. And then that was mostly by heart, by ear. And then when in college, it was almost 100%, just kind of intellectual from the head. And, as you had just shared, that, kind of got lost in this intellectualism. And we actually even had a seminar where this guy, he came in and he taught us, college level students, how to play one note. That was it. He's like, just play one note. And the whole intent was like, bring us back to feeling music again, bring us back to hearing music again. Because we'd gone, so far down the one pendulum where it was becoming a little bit like awkward, a little bit mechanical. I was like, am I doing this right? And, the reason I chose jazz is because I love jazz, and I love that it bridges both of those worlds, right? So some of the greatest jazz musicians have the most technical grasp on music. They can play some of the most complex music, and that's how jazz is actually structured, right? It's like you have what's called the head, which is the intro, which has all these like complex chord changes and like notes out the yin yang, and then you get into solos and it's like, like, then it's just pure, like, spontaneous, most incredible synchronization of what can't be explained by science, like the intuition, the connectivity, like it's unbelievable, right? And then boom, it's back, right? So I think to approach life, I learned so much from that experience that I've then applied to so many other areas. So food and nutrition, right? I think the foundation is follow your gut. You do not need a degree to figure out how to feed yourselves. Yet we've gotten so lost, and we have so much intellectual information out there that it does require that faculty to be able to reason, to think, to logic, to understand. We need both, right? And that is the ultimate kind of place to be, just like jazz is, just within nutrition, just all these areas. If you can harmonize what might be described as the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, or the head and the gut and the heart, right? All those spaces. So for me, that's always what I strive for, and I think it applies to right now, and in our day and everything that's going on, right? It's like, how does this feel? What are you interpreting on a feeling sense, that sixth sense that truth? Like, we each have that within us, that instinct, that intuition, and we have our reason, our logical mind, which in our society we've kind of praised one over the other, right? But really it's about bringing those both into harmony.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm just thinking of how difficult that is right now, because we are mammals. And so there is that herd mentality piece where our, our mammalian brain, so to speak, wants to connect with others and, kind of follow along, so to speak. But there is that other piece of us, like you had mentioned, that is that intuitive knowing. And again, we're not, it's funny because as you're speaking, and I very much share your sentiment around the fact that, well, I think what we're seeing is a merger of this intuition and science right now. And it's kind of a rough and bumpy next time, right? To even, for some to want to let go of the maybe science's hegemonic place within, say, the biomedical model. But I'm thinking to people like Einstein, right, where he had that subjective knowing that he was onto something, right? And meanwhile, of course, at the same time, not only using intuition, but using his left brain, I have no doubt. It's just an amazing story of how about 10 years Einstein was laughed at until everything kind of fell into place and the scientific communities accepted him. And then basically it was as big as finding out the world's not flat, unless of course you think the world's flat. And well, not to say you, but people, listeners out there, no, joking. But there's subjective knowing, right? So, and I feel like anytime anybody calls into this subjective knowing right now, they're like labeled, boom, sound like a conspiracy theorist. It's just, you know what I mean? Where it's just something not that the mainstream saying, or if you call into question something is, from that following your gut place, it's not always so well received if it doesn't fit, again, the mainstream. So
yeah, totally. And what I find so interesting is that somehow, like we've overlooked that, in fact, the scientific process starts with intuition, doesn't it? Right? It's like,
right, yeah.
I've got like an inference, like, like curious, right? Like we don't often, say or whatever, like, pinpoint, okay, where's that coming from? But it starts with a hypothesis, like there's an inference, like, I want to explore this. And then you follow out the scientific process to kind of validate or invalidate that.
Right. And that's just it. It's someone's own personal bias that they're bringing, their own personality, their own ego and life experience that they're going to bring into the laboratory or what have you. So the fact, and this is the thing, like a lot of times, again, people within the medical establishment, when I'm speaking about holistic health, they often forget which paradigm, or not even sometimes know what paradigm they're operating out of. I mean, philosophical paradigm, that is. So a lot of current medicine is supposed to be evidence-based, air quotes, and that is done through materialistic, rational science where we can, hammer things down into small parts. But what we're realizing with something like coronavirus is that there's so many variables in place. We can't study these things in a lab. And it kind of goes back to the merger of subjective knowing and science right now. And I really think that the pendulum went so far down the science route, or the scientism now, and now we're starting to kind of, the pendulum is going to, again, rest in the center. And I think we're going to have that equanimity that, is a Vipassana word, right? Where we're able to take our left brain into something, the skills that we know, and then at the same time feel into it, right? So yeah, it's just a super important topic, and I'm glad this is where we're going with things for sure.
Cool. Well, let me share a little tool that I've developed to help folks, navigate the world of food and nutrition, because I know it is a confusing world. And if you apply this tool, you'll be able to figure out, what food is right for you, what diet is right for you, and you just kind of cut through all the kind of the BS. And I use this every single day in my own life, but also as in my business as well, because I'm sure you can imagine, as a business owner, like, especially about, a health food store, I get, marketing reps and sales reps like, oh, you're good, like, here's the latest, greatest, try this, you should sell this. And I've got really high standards. It's not like, oh, it's in your catalog. Okay, well, let's just put it on the shelf. It's like, no, like there's a lot of discernment, and that's what has helped build our reputation and make it a destination store, because people trust it in that sense. So it's a tool I call a scope, and it's an acronym, but think of it as a lens. So it's a food scope. And the acronym starts with science. So for S, like there's so much value that science brings to the table with food and nutrition, right? It can tell us what's in a food, right? Chemical constituents, the breakdown, the nutrients, how much, on and on and on. And it can tell us, what the effects are, positive or negative, of those compounds, those nutrients, chemical constituents, on our body, short-term, long-term, and it's amazing, right? And we can really get a lot of guidance from that. And I think what I'll caveat, there's a couple things as it comes to all of these lenses, as well as the science one specifically, is that they all need to be put together. So science lens, awesome, use it. But you need the other ones with it, just like the other ones need every other one with it to get the full picture. Right. We also need to keep in perspective that science is still new, especially nutrition science, right? I mean, I think a lot of, doctors and whatever, they're like, sheesh, like it's, like it kind of gets put down
Mhm.
because it is still in its infancy. It's still evolving and growing, and science continues to, new discovery, chemical
Right,
found in broccoli, known to cure cancer or whatever, right? Like,
right,
let it unfold. Like, how long ago did we discover vitamin C? How long ago did we
right,
discover XYZ? It's a continual unfoldment.
right,
And that's good, but it also just puts it in perspective
right,
about science, and that we need the other ones too.
right.
I, though some people try and eat purely by science alone.
Yeah, I've been there for one, right? And it's yeah, it's again, it's just my journey is just that merger of both those worlds where say science and supplementation, where it's just, and then again on the opposite side, a little more holistic health, from the emotions that you're having while you're eating, where you're eating, and obviously the right foods, making sure you're not eating food intolerances. So yeah, I've been on like kind of both sides of the fence for most of my life, and it has to balance in the middle, right? I think as much as, and again, sometimes with the science around nutrition, it's literally when you're looking at apples to apples in certain studies, it's almost like comparing apples to oranges because of parameters and things like that. So it's a very messy neck of the woods when it comes to science. And actually, one of my grand ideas is to write a book one day, and something that came to me during a vision quest, actually, and this is the first time I've ever spoken publicly about it, but it is in the works. But yeah, essentially the quest for food, right? So as soon as we started becoming removed from nature, we started to overthink what the heck we eat, and in the process we've kind of lost it all. So now I just think it's right for this time where we're merging left and right hemispheres, or head and heart, however you want to call it, body and soul. But yeah, we're actually getting back to this intuitive eating piece, which I think is, yeah, super important without a doubt.
Yeah. Michael Pollan, New York Times food writer, bestseller, incredible thinker and writer. A lot of his books have been turned into documentaries, like In Defense of Food, The Botany of Desire, Cooked is another great one. He gave this analogy, right? Like that we've over intellectualized food, and made it so scientific that there's such a disconnect, right? You're walking down the grocery aisle and you're like, okay, I know I need antioxidants and I need quercetin
Yeah.
and I need this and I need that. And it's like, well, how do you relate to that, right? Just as a mom in a grocery store trying to feed and nourish your family.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need these other lenses. So C in the acronym, it stands for culture.
Mm.
And again, leading back to Michael Pollan, he says, in this day and age, he feels that culture has more to teach us than does science, government, or industry when it comes to food and nutrition. And unfortunately, science, government, industry are louder voices that have led down the path of this confusion. Not to say that they don't have anything valuable to offer us, but here we are. And in my journey, when I got really confused, I come back from India, I wasn't feeling good, the vegetarian still wasn't working. I'm sure I picked up some parasites, and I went and saw a local herbalist, Dr. Terry Willard. And he says, Malcolm, if you ever get confused about what to eat, just come back to what your ancestors ate. I was like, what? The Scottish? Like, and of course,
Big intestines.
yeah, the
Intestines and
modern
things.
Scottish diet.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? The modern Scottish diet has produced, a country of people that have some of the highest rates of obesity and heart disease. So what we're looking at here is traditional cultural diets. And like you said, they eat, whole animal cookery, right? Blood pudding and haggis and this and that. And so then I really started to look at cultural diets. And here's a quick little key piece that we're going to get into, which is the 4 food groups. Now, the only reliably bad cultural diet in the world is the Western standard American diet, right? The modern diet, the industrialized food diet that all the Western industrialized countries consume. If you want any of the top 10 food and lifestyle diseases of the day, take your pick: heart disease, obesity, cancer, diabetes, the list goes on. If you want a really good chance of getting any one of those, just follow the modern standard diet.
Right. Yeah.
We're taught like the 4 food groups and the food pyramid. Now, cultural diets, it turns out there is actually 4 food groups. And we can look at every single culture throughout time around the world actually does consume food from these 4 food groups. And I love it. Food should be simple. And so this is a very simple guide. And I love when you apply this guide, you start looking at it, it won't actually tell you what to eat, when to eat, or how much to eat. That's that individual piece that's going to change, with the day, with the month, with the seasons, with the year, the stage of life, all that stuff. It becomes this journey, but we have at least a broad framework. And those 4 food groups are plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. And each one of those we can dive into a little bit deeper. And I'll say the caveat for all of them requires a diversity. So I already mentioned a little bit how, the industrialized food system, which is making choices about food that are not in our best interest in terms of health, that has resulted in the food system that we have. Of course, they're making choices about profit. They're making choices about, shelf stability, transportation, maximum yield, on and on and on and on. Other than, hey, not only like, is this tasty, but is it nourishing? Is it, full of nutrients? And when we make those types of decisions too long and all that goodness gets kind of weeded out, then we run into troubles. So we need a diversity, and we need a quality, because, like you said, you mentioned, if we look at a study that's like comparing apples to apples, well, where did these apples come from? Or chicken and chicken. You say, well, butter is bad for you. Well, what kind of butter are we talking about? Are we talking about like grass-fed butter, from a small local dairy? Or are we talking about, the stuff sitting on the shelf at the supermarket? Totally different foods, depending on the system it comes from. So this is the biggest thing I learned. And it could be summarized in the phrase, which maybe you've heard, is it's not the cow, it's the how, right? It's like, how is that cow raised, or any other food that you are looking at, because that absolutely affects the quality and the nutrients.
I'll say this, I walked into I guess it was my master's or what have you, and we had seminars with the rest of, my classmates, about a group of 30 grad students within the health promotion field. And then I think someone just like quickly just passed over, well, we all know that, eating cow or eating dairy or whatever specifically it was, eating butter is horrible for you. Actually, no, that's what it was. It was during the time at a Western university professor had put out an article on egg yolks being as bad as smoking, making the comparison somehow through some statistics somewhere, but anyways, everyone was just like, well, yeah, of course, everyone knows that the saturated fat and is bad. And then here am I, have to like courageously again dig deep and find my purpose. Like, well, again, to your point, it's not the cow, it's the how. And I basically threw a bomb in the middle of the room, and I was semi like just fringed for the rest of. I made a few friends, without a doubt, but still put on the fringe of things, right? So yeah, I thanks for saying that. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So let's just quickly dive into each of those 4 food groups and how folks can think about, and there's a lot of that terminology like hack it, like what's a little quick little hack? So a quick little hack for plants is eat the rainbow, right? So Roy G. Biv, black, white, brown, every single color in its natural state, right, from nature. We're not talking about, red dye number 4, is representation of nutrients, a different phytonutrient, antioxidant that has a beneficial function in the body. So, we've reduced kind of the color variety in our diet, so we need to re-expand that. Eat the rainbow, and I would say include herbs as a subcategory, right? So I'm not a herbalist, and for years, as I had friends that were studying to be herbalists, and I chose the path of nutrition. I'm going to become a nutritionist, and I really kind of blocked out the world of herbs because it was like, oh, I'm intimidated. I thought it's a whole other degree. I can't go down that path. And it's like, I had this shift. It was a friend of mine. He's like, Malcolm, you don't need to be a herbalist. You need to be your own herbalist.
I like it.
And plant medicine is the people's medicine. It is something that every single culture around the world, has utilized and practiced. And slowly, it's kind of gotten weeded out all the way from witch burnings and, you name it.
It's always been there. We've always been taking herbs and grinding them up, making powders and potions, and using them as our medicine and superfoods, right? Yeah,
totally.
I mean, that's just, and to your point about like, well, maybe we'll get there too, but like just looking at the Western food processing system, we've like killed culture in the process of making all these crazy Franken foods, and then in the process killed cultures and all the bacteria and diversity, right, that we have. So just amazing, some of the stuff that we've done here.
Yeah, cool. So, maybe you can, I like a new definition of herbalism, which I love herbalism. I love herbalists. I love all the different traditions. But in its pure essence, it is just wild food intuition is what it is, right? And herbalism is just the institutionalization of wild food intuition. So we all need to kind of come back to that and be our own herbalists, and not be intimidated by beginning to herbs into our everyday.
Without a doubt. Making tinctures is actually something I've taken up in recent years, with help of a mutual friend of ours, and just learning all sorts about herbs, right? Because it is a fascinating, and for me being a holistic lifestyle coach, or at least in the past, the herbal medicine piece is something that I've always just referred over to, like, say, naturopathic doctors or what have you, that have that intuition. But again, we can take something like a dandelion and use that plant in so many different ways for medicine, right? I've got some dandelion root tincture that I'm taking right now for a liver protocol, right? Just for overall health care of my liver. So just amazing what's there right on our front lawns, right?
Yeah, cool. So I know you and I could probably talk for hours, and there's so many like rabbit holes we could go into, and
Right.
herbalism, getting into that is a big giant one, as is talking about the full spectrum of plant foods. So just in the essence of time, I'll kind of like
sure.
over and just offering these hacks. So with animal foods, again, think about the system that it comes from, and the smaller scale, the better. And another really, really key point included in that diversity is eating the whole animal, right? So, I'm into whole foods, right? But it's like, how often do I actually eat the whole animal? Most people, it's like chicken breasts, it's steaks, it's, thighs. It's like, they're picking pieces of the animal. Right. And there's absolutely conclusive evidence that our health is intimately connected to consuming every part, and that oftentimes, the organs on a nutrient perspective balance out all that kind of muscle and tissue need.
Right. And on that note, one thing I love to do is I'll make a bone broth out of a chicken carcass, and I'll boil that for at least 24 hours. And then all those little flexible bits of bone and connective tissue, I'll actually take those and separate those, and I'll either blend them up, or I just take some fermented hot sauce that I've made, and I call it caveman chicken wings, because you're eating the bones and all that other parts for all the nutrients coming from that, right?
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, that's a great segue to the next kingdom and food group, which is bacteria, which are fermented foods. And again, modern industrialized food system had almost all but eliminated that, or it had changed it, transformed it, through things like pasteurization, where we're getting these like sterilized fermented foods. And some of the greatest, foods, delicacies from around the world are fermented and absolutely essential. These are all key food groups. You cannot get nutrients from, like, each of them offers nutrients that you can't get from the other. Fermented foods, it's probiotics, right? So it's about that ties into that whole thing of like the microbiome, of which, nutrition science is kind of on the cutting edge, and exploring, and so many other benefits. Like, it helps, there's a lot of practical functions, like, preserving our food, but it helps pre-digest it. It actually, so a lot of people who are maybe sensitive to dairy, sensitive to wheat, beans, grains, this kind of a thing, the fermentation is a transformative action that actually helps our body not only digest that food, but assimilate the nutrients. And it has been shown to increase the amount of nutrients. Like, there's more vitamin C in sauerkraut than there is in cabbage. There's more B vitamins in fermented foods. There's more protein. Like, there's lots and lots that gets released from fermented foods. Plus, literally, the bacteria themselves are also a source of nutrition.
Yeah, it's amazing the information that we get from food that's full of bacteria and rich, because I think of food as more than just the macronutrients going in. It's information, right, that we're getting. So by consuming these bacteria and having a diverse amount of them, we're able to interact in our world in a much more natural way, or at least a way that we've been doing for thousands upon years with these foods, right?
Totally. And I think maybe if we want to tie in the broader scope of our conversation, especially what happening right now, everything we're talking about with these 4 food groups is so key and so important. And oftentimes, we forget, like, okay, we're in the middle of this, massive public health crisis. Well, that is only being allowed, for a number of reasons. And let's just even put aside, all the conspiracies and any kind of counter narrative. Like, okay, if that's the case, if like
Thank
people
you.
are dropping dead, like left, right, and center, people are getting sick, we've got, threat of this virus, it's because we've moved away from plants as medicine. It's because we've moved away from whole animal cooking. It's because we've moved away from, medicinal mushrooms as a source of medicine. And it's absolutely because we've moved away from bacteria as a food source. Bacteria is a symbiotic relationship, a part of our microbiomes. And unfortunately, so many people are just continuing down that path of like, sterilization and war on bacteria, where I think that's what's brought about this type of state of non-health to begin with.
Without a doubt. And I mean, it's just amazing looking at research that is near and dear to me, having, a business within fermented foods, and that is looking at studies. And again, not to say we're all rats, but looking at studies where they've taken fecal transplants from one healthy weight rat and giving it to an obese rat, and then that individual or rat essentially losing weight, right? So, and right now, it's kind of crazy to me when we look at the actual data and who is having a rough time with this virus. And we're seeing it's individuals who are obese, right? And it's just like, well, wait a minute, why aren't we talking about all these amazing things like vitamin D, for example? People who have a rough time with this virus have low vitamin D levels. So it's like, why isn't this being talked about? This is easy first line defense we can all, do by just going outside and getting some sun, right?
Totally.
So,
Yeah. Or eating, natural eggs or eating liver, like
right,
all
yeah.
these foods are known to kind of boost our vitamin D levels. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the people that are being affected the most, on average, 2.6 comorbidities, right? Like these are, and I get it, like just before someone like jumps down and says, well, I know somebody who's super healthy and they become susceptible.
Yeah.
That, okay, I hear those stories, there's obviously some exceptions, but the vast majority, like 95, 98, 99 plus percent, it is people that are already struggling physically, with their health.
Well, and to the point about other people who are healthy, not to get too down on a rabbit hole, but there is the whole idea that, you've got sick, healthy people, right? I mean, in my younger business school days, I was a personal trainer and I was crushing it. Everyone looked at my abs and they thought, hey, this guy's healthy. Hey, he knows all this about nutrition. And at the end of the day, I'm, slowly getting sick inside, right? So, and again, beating my head to the, grindstone with schoolwork and everything like that, I was stressed. If something like this virus is around in that time of my life, if I would have, I believe I have picked it up, fought it, and I'm fine. But I believe at that point in my life, if I would have something like this, I would have been, kicked down a couple stairs for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you mentioned, that made me think of something else, this idea of like, sick, healthy people or healthy people that are infected. So this idea that asymptomatic carriers, right? They've got the disease. Well, asymptomatic, it means you're healthy, right? Like you have no symptoms. 40% of people don't even know they've had the coronavirus, right? Like they just carry on. I know there's definitely a bit of debate and gray area in terms of, are they transmitting the disease? But that is how we should be. Viruses are a part of our microbiome. They are a part of our own internal and external ecosystem. And I know we'll probably get into this as well, that kind of, two different paradigms, which I think there's room for those to come together. But the opposing viewpoints are terrain theory versus germ theory, right? Germ theory, Louis Pasteur, it's all about the germ, it's all about the microbe, we got to kill it, we got to it's bad. And the terrain theory says, hey, there are germs, there are viruses, there are microbes, but if we maintain a healthy ecosystem, then they can't take over. And a good example would be the swamp breeds the mosquito doesn't breed the swamp, right? I personally am more on the terrain theory idea that it's really the environment that will allow, and I also, again, it's kind of like the yin yang, right? It's like, here's my truth with a little dot of, yeah, you could still have an incredibly healthy terrain system, and there might be that one little thing that comes in and takes you out,
Right. We
so
don't
it
know,
is
yeah.
a merger of the two.
Right. Well, actually, it's an analogy of like a tomato plant. You've got a full, lovely tomato plant. Some of those tomatoes on a certain side of the plant just happen to get this black spot, fall off, and die. Right. Like, what is it about that specific ecosystem? But I think to your point, it is looking at the terrain and saying like, well, what's the environment like over there, or what, But to say it's genetics and we therefore have to like immunize all these tomato plants before they all get sick, it's like not necessarily, right. A lot of them are still healthy and good. So.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. So I know we were talking about
Yeah.
the food scope. We're going through
Yes.
science. In the myth of culture, the last little piece within culture, as we're looking at the 4 food groups that all humans consume, the very last one from plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi, those are mushrooms. And that's all the way from single-celled yeast to these kind of large noble polypores, things like reishi mushroom, chaga, lion's mane, so on and so forth, that are, gaining more kind of attention, notoriety, tons of research about those. And I guess all I'll just say is that fungi have been allies. They have been organisms that humans have used as both food and medicine throughout millennia. They are key allies, again, all the way from yeast and even molds, that whole kingdom. Even a huge number of our pharmaceuticals today are from the fungi kingdom. And so I guess my kind of suggestion is to A, first acknowledge that, and then B, begin to consciously bring in sources of fungi as food and as medicine. And my approach is to do that in a kind of a more natural, whole food way. So that's the piece that kind of finishes culture off for me. And then as we keep going through that acronym, so O would be opinions, others' experiences. And, like you mentioned, we're social animals, we're herd animals. We can learn a ton from other people. It can also be used against us, right, in terms of being influenced.
Right.
But
Yeah.
don't let that dissuade you, right? Like I have fast tracked my learning along this path by just simply like paying attention to other people. Like, what are they doing? I first got into spring water because a friend told me, he's like, dude, you got to try it. Like, water straight out of the earth. And I was like, well, but wait, how can you do that? You can't do that. He's like, well, I've been doing it for 10 years now. Like, it feels the best ever. And here's the science, and here's how other cultures did it, right? It was lining up all those lenses where I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. So, and we really need to be discerning. When I was, part of my raw vegan path, that I kind of pulled my family along with, and I brought my wife and my daughter down that path, because I was so inspired by others' experiences and their stories of raw food healing and this and that. But once I kind of took a step back, I was like, okay, wait a minute, like, let me actually really truly look at who are these individuals, how long have they been on this diet, what stage of life are they in, and just put it into context, right? So when it came to then appropriately nourishing, my wife and daughter, and through that, pregnancy and breastfeeding and all that, I then, instead of just looking at, 30-year-old males or, young women that have been on the raw food diet for 6 months, right? I was like, let me look at, mothers and their experiences. It became so much more informed. And I know that sounds really obvious, but, I totally missed it, right? So having that kind of acronym and that scope and putting it through each lens. And so the very last 2 are personal experience. And that's really what brings it all together. And that's that intuition. But again, you can't just do it alone, right? I'm not saying like, just use your experience, right? It's like, I'm going to go to the forest. I'm going to pick this mushroom. I'm going to try it. Forget what science says, forget what culture says, forget the other people yelling at me saying, don't eat that one.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Thanks for saying that. We don't want to get this one censored for that. No.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's every lens, you can look at any food, any diet, and know if it's right for you. Because, sure, science might say, look at this food, it's incredible, like spirulina, like nutrients out the yin yangs, complete protein, 65 different vitamins, minerals. Look at, the cultural diets, the Aztecs consumed it, the health food community is raving about it, but you try it and it's like, I got a reaction. It didn't sit well. Like, ultimately it does come down to you, but we need to put all those lenses together.
Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad that we went over that, and it's practical as heck. I love that acronym, and I think it's important because, again, going back to, people are kind of fed up with your standard Canadian food guide type thing. People are saying this isn't enough, or they're becoming privy that I need to take control. So what I find is interesting is that folks who aren't so keen, maybe this is just my biased experience, but people who aren't so keen on holistic eating or intuitive eating, however you want to call it, are the ones that, are kind of really pushing for, not to say the only ones, but they are some of the people who are pushing for lockdowns, pushing for masks. and it's putting that that locus of control outside of themselves, or maybe they don't believe they have control, which I feel for them. But I'm just so grateful that you're delivering this message right now and letting people know this is how we regain control. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I do believe this podcast is hopefully helping individuals increase control of their health, and again, just kind of be able to intuitively know that they are their own healer, essentially, right? We are our own healers. Our number one healthcare system that we could have here in Canada is self-care first, and then we could start talking about filling in the pieces.
Yeah, totally. Because, I think that's the most revealing thing. I literally every day I talk to, or get messages from, nurses, paramedics, firefighters, doctors. And it's true. What they're saying about we could overwhelm the healthcare system is true, because it's already at max, right? It doesn't take much to kind of flip the switch. We have an incredible sick care system that people leave their health right until the last, until they're in some sort of state of disease or emergency, and they rely on this system that is already burdened. So you have, again, just put all the other kind of counter narratives aside. If there is this kind of deadly, crazy, virus could make everyone sick, for sure. Like this is the result we're going to get. And that's the state we're in. So it is like the biggest fundamental way to change this and not continue down that path, relying on this end stage sick care emergency system, which plays a role. It has its place, but we've abused it, right? We've overused it. We're over reliance on it. And so we need to shift that individually, and then that will shift the whole thing culturally, societally. But unfortunately, it's not the conversations that are happening in the mainstream narrative. And that's why your podcast is so important. That's why, I work with nutritionists, I work with herbalists. Like since I have business experience and I've had success, I've also shifted my mission, right? Inspiring positive contribution, in the world, is empowering all these other people. Like, man, you got to get your voice out there. You got to get your message heard. And you got to do it in a way that supports you, that you have a livelihood, that you can do this full time.
Right on. No, that's so important, because you can't do this stuff for free. It's just not possible in the world we live in. But I thank you for, putting that all on a very positive note, or as I see it, because this is an opportunity to change. It's an opportunity to see what doesn't work and fix it. And lockdowns and things like that were originally to slow the spread of the virus, and so to not overwhelm our sick care system, as I often call it as well, to overwhelm it, right? So I really do like to put a positive spin on this, and it might sometimes sound like it's an uphill battle, but we have the opportunity to change, and this virus isn't happening to us. I like to think of it happening for us, right? Like here's a great opportunity. And again, it's like all things in nature. The most beautiful things in nature, like a diamond, come from tons of pressure and the hottest fires in the center of the earth to create these diamonds. So it's never easy, this stuff, but it is kind of what we're left with, at least as I see it and like to share on the show, is that, hey, this is on our watch. We got to find our purpose, center ourselves, get quiet in nature. And again, it's just this full circle of us coming back, I think, to our connection with nature and this intuitive ability we have with our food. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me, I would be amiss not to share this, because I think even in the last week or two, it is really coming to the forefront that there is a solution, that there is a great reset, that we can, catalyze society to take advantage of this, chaos and everything that we're going through, to this kind of new, greater, better future. And when you start to look at the wording of the World Economic Forum, the UN Agenda 2030, it paints quite a kind of lovely picture. It's like equality for all, environmentalism, and like this kind of nice picture. And I'm going to stay away from that. This is an evil conspiracy and whatever. I would just get people to start thinking, as this comes up more and more, because you're going to hear both sides. You're going to hear a lot of this is the new world order and this is all conspiracy, and then you're going to hear the media trying to gaslighted and this and that. Just have a little bit of a thinking around this. So I personally, you're going to hear it in my voice. I'll just state it up front. I categorically reject the Great Reset, reject the UN Agenda 2030, not because I don't believe in equality, not because I don't believe in environmentalism. It's because how it's being presented, this top-down approach, that once you get into the details, once you get into the minutia of it, you realize it's just, it's global governments, it's another form of control, and it's moving in the absolute wrong direction that we want to go. The larger the governing body, and the farther out that we go, the less room there is for you as an individual. And someone painted it so perfectly, you know, because one of their slogans is like, you know, it's 2030, you own nothing, you have no privacy, and you're really happy. Well, on one end, you know, like, isn't that communism? You know, in the sense of like you own nothing. But
well, it is from a you know, an old school political science buff. Yeah, exactly. It very much is. Yes. Which I don't think everyone wants. Yeah.
No, for sure. And the other thing that someone pointed out was like, well, who owns it, right? It's like this is like billionaires, it's politicians, it's these elite that are like have this plan for everybody. Like, no, don't worry, you'll own nothing, and you know, like, so you're gonna own it all.
Well, it's so funny because I remember sitting in again that same seminar class back in my master's, and we were tasked with creating like a health policy to save people from obesity or what have you. And then I kind of looked around my group and I said, is it up to us to save people from obesity, right? Isn't it their, you know, decision more so, or you know, maybe circumstances, maybe equality, a lot of reasons that could lead to this. But for me as some, you know, educated grad student to come in and be like, and I do the air quotes there, I don't know if everybody can see that, but air quotes, you know, educated grad student to come in and say, I know better than your own intuition that's been developed for thousands upon thousands of years. It just doesn't sit well with me, right? And that would be kind of, again, imposing this like, oh, this better world, this new world order, which again is more top down, where it's leaving no room for intuitive eating. Like if this continues, like if you look at rates of, look at what's in your common grocery store, and you'll see carrots reduced down to orange, apples reduced down to these ones that have been genetically modified to be sweeter, this, that, or the other thing. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we're losing that ability. Even if we have intuition, it's like, oh, you've got apples, oranges, that's your whole choice, right? So I think it's important that, and I'm really happy that you're saying this, because it is important that we talk about what this is. I think these individuals are doing what they see as best, but they don't have the knowledge that you and I do. They don't have the experience that maybe you and I do, looking at other cultures and how they eat and how close they are to their food. And they don't know things like terrain theory, right? A lot of folks, sometimes people, you know, sometimes I have to remember that not everyone sees the picture the way I do, and that, you know, we are in this transitionary time of a new paradigm within medicine and science, and that, yeah, we're slowly switching over. So again, I again, thank you for speaking and right now during this time, because sometimes it's, for me, it's like, geez, how am I going to frame this in such a way where I'm not pissing off my folks at school, it's just like the powers that be at school, and at the same time doing what I'm here to do, which is help people, right? So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, cool, right on.
Without a doubt. Well, I see we're getting up on our hour here, so I respect your time. And I know you're busy with a fermentation festival and whatnot this weekend, I believe. So I guess what I'll do is I'll kind of wrap this up with a few, well, let's do this. One more thing, because we're going to have an offering for listeners here, and that's going to be for a free ebook. So if so specifically though, when looking at your site and everything, you have a wealth of knowledge on the world of elixirs, tasty elixirs. I'm also an elixir lover as a fermentation junkie and kombucha enthusiast. So maybe share with folks one real practical thing. If they want to leave right now, I want to help myself be healthier, and whether they can go down to the local health food store or wherever and buy these ingredients to make an elixir. What type of an elixir is coming to you right now that you can share with folks? Yeah.
So just to quickly explain the concept, because I know, you know,
what is an elixir too? Yeah.
That elixir can conjure up all kinds of images and imaginings. So kind of practically, functionally, a friend of mine described it. He's like, okay, Malcolm, I think I'm getting it. It's like, is it sort of like if bulletproof coffee and superfood smoothies got together and had a baby? Like, would that be an elixir? And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. So
that's cool.
on a practical terms, it is literally, we have that saying, let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. I describe it as the best in modern nutrition with ancient herbal wisdom. And, the coffee analogy that represents, herbs, right? It's a very popular beverage that has a herbal function, right? In the sense of like, boosting energy, increasing focus, that type of thing. And then the smoothie, it's like that grab and go, all your nutrients for the day. Now imagine a beverage that brings those two together. Not literally, because I don't think that would taste very well,
Be tough, yeah.
but crafted, artfully, intelligently, for what I describe as flavor, function, feeling, right? It's this idea of crafting a drink for flavor, for function, for feeling. That's what an elixir is. And the best thing is you don't have to, take on a new habit. It's like, oh, you got to start exercising more, although that's always good too, right? People struggle with creating new habits. So anytime, I think most people have a morning coffee or an afternoon tea or a, grab and go smoothie, right? So it's upgrading, it's elevating what you already do, just expanding it out, so you don't have to create a new habit. And it's just, you're just adding this into your everyday. So change nothing, right? Like still keep eating your chicken, doing this, doing that, thinking about, of course, the 4 food groups that we talked about and those kind of like little hack principles as well that you can integrate. But it's like, keep doing what you're doing, right? And just start to add in elixirs, make it easy. And so I've seen a ton of benefits from people doing that, bringing in, food and medicine into this kind of one quick, easy beverage.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's it's important. It's just something new. Elixir was one of those kind of sexy new words within the health field, I think, in the last few years. So it's I think still a lot of people are like, what the heck is an elixir anyway? So one of my favorite things, and you talking about bulletproof coffee with this and that, is again just throwing things like your mushrooms into your coffee, right? So a function like just today I had my chaga mushroom coffee and with some butter and some MCT oil, a little bit of cinnamon, and start my day like that. So so much function there. I appreciate that. So last question, and it's a question I asked everybody. We've chatted a lot about intuitive eating today and kind of juxtapose that on the scene on this, for the lack of attention it's getting within the mainstream. Tell me, what is your wildest dream for the earth?
Right. Okay. Incredible. I think it is, it obviously ties in a lot of what we've been talking about. And I think for humans to get there, it is that merger of those two ways of knowing, right? Like the reason, the logic, the intellect, the scientific thinking and reasoning, but also that heart-based way of being and knowing and living, developing both those faculties. And I think if we move forward in that way, if we move forward, I love how you said it. It's like, do we need this top-down like policy creation, like the social engineering from technocrats? Or should it come from the ground up? Should it be led by the individual? Not from, people who are ignorant and have no idea what's going on, right? But from a space of developing both those faculties. I think that is the ultimate way to go. And, when it comes to like environmental policy, like we need to respect the earth, but I think it needs to come from that knowing of how to live right, how to live well, how to live in balance, live in harmony with nature and community, and that versus kind of a top down. So I really want to see people develop both their faculties, tune in, and move from that space and away from this kind of top down technocracy that's coming in.
Thank you. I share that sentiment for grassroots movements without a doubt. I find within research and within health promotion, you can't just go and tell someone to do this or do that, eat this way, move more, sit less. It really does have to come from the grassroots, and those people involved with that problem have to actually take ownership of it. And then from there can do what needs to be done. So I really appreciate that. Yeah.
We're at a breaking point right now. It's like, you can't even leave your house, right? Because you're being told. And it's like you say, it's a little bit ugly. It's a little bit like uncomfortable because there's this ton of perturbation going on, but it's coming to a head, right? And one of my good friends, we've been saying for years, right? Like knowing, like looking at society, seeing what's going on. It's like, we're like, wow, like how long can this go on for, right? Like this trajectory, we've all known that the trajectory we've been on, the life we've been living, how most people are kind of, asleep, awake kind of a thing. Okay, here is the shift. Here's the opportunity for a great reset, if we want to call it that. But let's envision it ourselves individually and communities, from bottom up, not a top down.
Without a doubt. And it reminds me of a Joanna Macy's work in The Great Transition, I believe is the name of the book. But yeah, again, this is, people have been talking about this within conscious circles or for some time. And for me to kind of be new to it, let's say in the last 10 years of my life, and to be like, wow, it's here on our watch. It's just, again, such an amazing opportunity. And it's so great because people like you and I are able to connect and, you know, and share this news with other Canadians and Americans and people around the world. So again, I really appreciate you being here. I respect your time because we're there at the hour. And I guess before we go though, thank you for being here yet again. And yeah, please tell folks how they can find you. And then again, that offering in regards to the free ebook.
Okay, cool. So my company, Lightseller, Lightceller, Light and Seller. You can find .ca, find the website there, and that'll connect you to kind of some of the social stuff we're doing, the online courses that we have. Like you mentioned, we're running a fermentation festival right now. We have elixir crafting courses, make your own chocolate, goes on and on and on. So lots of resources there. And of course, through the social media, at Lightseller on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and then my own personal work at The Malcolmist. You can find me on various platforms as well.
Right. Yeah. And I really do appreciate all the content you're personally putting out right now. And yeah, it was, we didn't get too much down that rabbit hole of all things that people might air quotes call conspiracy, but you know what, this went well. And I hope you come back on the show and we can chat about many other things again. So
yeah, totally. We have lots more to chat about. So thanks again for initiating conversation today and look forward to next.
Indeed. Thank you. And thanks everybody listening out there. Please check out all of Malcolm's work. And if you've got a minute and you enjoyed this episode, please stop by on the platform of your choice and leave a rating and review. Thank you very much for listening. Much love and stay wild. There we go.